For as long as anyone can remember, we've been told that America is the big brother up here, the strong one keeping little Canada safe and fed. But this statement is completely wrong. Not because we are saying it, but because the facts prove this. As when you actually look at what crosses that border every single day, the water, the oil, the metals, the fuel that keeps American factories running, a different truth shows up. It isn't Canada leaning on the States. It's the States leaning hard on Canada, whether it wants to admit it or not. We all have seen the clips of Americans saying Canada should be grateful, that Canada only survives because of the United States, that without them, the country up north would fall apart. But it's the exact opposite of what's true. So, forget the army sizes and the population numbers for a minute. The States has 10 times the people and a military budget many times bigger, sure. But geography doesn't care about any of that. Geography plays by its own rules, starting with the thing nobody thinks about until it's gone. And that's fresh water. Canada is sitting on around 20% of all the fresh water on the entire planet. One country, a fifth of the world's water. The Great Lakes, the ones that give drinking water to something like 40 million Americans, aren't just American lakes. They're shared, right along the Canadian border. Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, all of them touch Canadian ground. The St. Lawrence Seaway that carries all that water out to the Atlantic runs straight through Quebec. The Niagara River sits on the border. The Detroit River sits on the border. This isn't a small technical detail. That same water doesn't just fill glasses, it spins hydro turbines that light up American homes, and it floats the ships that haul iron ore to the steel mills in places like Pennsylvania. Think about what that chain really means. If the water stops moving the right way, the ore boats don't sail. If the ore doesn't reach the mills, the steel doesn't get made. And if the steel doesn't get made, American factories that build everything from cars to bridges start grinding down. One shared waterway and a huge piece of American industry hangs off it. So the entire American industrial heartland, the beating heart of their whole economy, runs on water that's tangled up with Canada. And there's nothing the States can do to change that. You can't invade a country to grab its rivers. The Canada-US border runs about 5,500 miles, longer than flying from New York to London, and a huge chunk of it is bush and rock so rough it'd swallow an army whole. This is the strange thing about geography. It hands a smaller country a grip on a bigger one that no amount of money or firepower can pry loose. So America just has to keep Canada friendly. It has no other option. Now let's talk oil, because this one's the giant, and it's the clearest proof of the whole point. Canada is America's #1 oil supplier, and it isn't close. Every single day, Canada ships around 3.9 million barrels of crude down south into American refineries in Texas, Illinois, Oklahoma, and beyond. That's more oil than the States buys from any other country on Earth, more than the whole Middle East sends them combined. In fact, Canada now provides well over 60% of all the oil America brings in from abroad, and those exports have been climbing to record highs year after year. Sit with that for a second. When an American fills up their truck, better than half the odds are that fuel started as thick Alberta crude. And most of that oil rides south through a handful of big pipelines, especially one giant system called Enbridge. If that flow ever stopped, American gas prices wouldn't creep up. They'd rocket, and fast. A lot of the refineries down there, especially the big ones in the Midwest and along the Gulf, were specially built to handle Canada's thick, heavy crude. They're tuned for it. They can't just flip a switch and run light oil from somewhere else instead. So it's not only that America wants Canadian oil, it's that a big slice of its refining machine was designed around it and can't easily run without it. Turn off the tap and you don't get a slowdown. You get a heart attack. The whole machine down there is built around a steady river of Canadian oil showing up on time, every single day. People love to say America could just make its own power and stand on its own. But here's a fact that surprises folks on both sides of the border. Canada is the single biggest source of electricity that the United States imports from anywhere. When American power grids need to buy juice from outside, over 80% of it comes from Canada, mostly clean hydropower out of Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia, flowing south through transmission lines at the border. Now, to be straight with you, that imported power is a small slice of America's total. They still make most of their own, but it's the backup, the safety cushion. When a heat wave hits and grids in New England or New York or Michigan start to buckle, it's Canadian hydro that quietly keeps the lights on and stops the whole thing from tipping into a blackout. It's the kind of thing nobody notices until the day it isn't there. And Canadians have already seen how sharp that tool can be. When the trade fights flared up, one premier out east openly floated the idea of adding a surcharge to the power flowing south, or cutting it off entirely, and it rattled the American side in a hurry. That's the thing about a safety cushion. The moment the folks depending on it realize it might get pulled away, they start paying attention real fast. There's another piece of the energy story that hardly ever gets talked about, and it's just as big: natural gas. This is the fuel that heats a huge share of American homes in winter and runs a big chunk of their power plants year-round. And when it comes to the gas America buys from other countries, almost all of it, close to 100%, comes from Canada. Not most of it, nearly all of it. Pipelines carry Canadian gas south into the American Midwest and Northeast, and it shows up right when demand spikes in the dead of a cold snap, when everyone cranks the heat at once. A brutal January freeze rolls across the northern states, furnaces running flat out, and it's a steady push of Canadian gas, keeping the whole system fed. Cut that off, and you're not talking about higher bills. You're talking about homes going cold when it's 40 below outside. That's the kind of quiet life and death dependence that never makes the news. And it runs one direction, from Canada down. Now let's get to critical minerals, because this next piece is where Canada might be sitting on the most leverage of all. These are the metals the modern world is built on, the stuff inside your phone, your laptop, electric car batteries, wind turbines, solar panels, even fighter jets and missiles. And Canada is loaded with them. It ranks #1 in the world for potash and #2 for uranium. And it's got serious piles of nickel, cobalt, lithium, copper, and rare earths on top of that. Now look at how much America leans on Canada for this. Canada supplies around 71% of all the potash the US uses, the stuff that fertilizes the crops that feed the country. Think about that one for a second. The food on American dinner tables, the corn, the wheat, the soy grown across the whole middle of that country, leans on fertilizer that mostly comes from one province up in Canada. It supplies about 1/5 of America's uranium, which fuels their nuclear plants and keeps a big share of their cities powered. Chunk after chunk of the metals and materials America needs to build anything modern or grow anything at all comes straight from up north. Why does that matter so much right now? Because the other big player in minerals is China, and the states in China are locked in a serious standoff. China already controls most of the world's rare earth processing, well over 90% of it, and it's started choking off supply on purpose, slapping export controls on the exact metals America needs for its factories and its weapons. That's a scary spot for the states to be in. Suddenly, the country that builds the world's most powerful military realizes it can't get the raw material to build its gear without going through a rival. That leaves America needing a friend with the goods, badly. And Canada is exactly that friend, a stable, safe, next-door country, sitting on almost everything the US is scrambling for. Then, there's the part of this story that's still being written, and it might be the biggest of them all: the Arctic. The ice up top of the world is melting, and as it goes, brand new shipping routes are opening up across the Arctic Ocean. Routes that could become the busiest trade highways on the planet, cutting the trip between Asia and Europe way down. The main one, the Northwest Passage, runs right through Canadian waters. Whoever controls that controls a piece of the future of global trade, the tolls, the rules, who gets through and who waits. And it's not just about ships. Under that Arctic seabed sits a massive stash of untapped oil and natural gas, some of the last big reserves left anywhere. And a lot of it can only really be reached over Canadian land. As the ice pulls back, Canada gets first crack at some of the last great energy prizes left on Earth. And make no mistake, the whole world can see this coming. Russia's already up there in a big way, building military bases all along its Arctic coast and parking ice-breaking ships nobody else can match. China's pouring billions into Arctic shipping and calling itself a near-Arctic nation, even though it's nowhere near it, just to get a foot in the door. So this frozen top of the world is quietly turning into one of the most contested spots on the planet. And in that whole northern game, Canada holds the best seat at the table: the geography, the coastline, the territory, the claim that goes back generations. America has one small stretch of Arctic through Alaska. Canada has a giant one. It's got a real shot at becoming the gatekeeper of the Arctic, deciding who moves through the top of the world and who doesn't. And that alone could quietly make it one of the most powerful and important countries there is. So put the whole picture together, and it looks nothing like the story we grew up with. Canada's got its hands on America's water, on the oil that fuels its trucks, on the backup power that saves its grid, on the minerals that build its future, and on the Arctic doorway to what comes next. Any one of those is a big deal. All of them at once, that's not a little brother. That's a country holding cards the superpower next door simply cannot match. And this isn't just talk anymore. Canada's own leaders have started saying it out loud. The Prime Minister has been flat out calling Canada an energy superpower, telling the world that Canada has what everybody wants and doesn't have to sit quietly and take orders. For a country that's spent its whole life being polite and low-key about all this, that's a big shift. Because for generations, Canada had all this power and barely mentioned it. It just kept shipping the goods south, kept the peace, kept its head down, and let the world go on thinking of it as the nice, harmless neighbor. But the ground is shifting. As trade fights heat up and the States throws its weight around with tariffs and tough talk, more and more Canadians are waking up to a simple fact. The leverage was here the whole time. Canada was never the one that needed protecting. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every threat that comes across the border cuts both ways now. The States can slap a tariff on Canadian goods, but Canada sells the oil that fuels their trucks, the gas that heats their homes, the potash that feeds their farms, and the power that backs up their grid. You don't win a fight with the country that keeps your lights on and your gas tank full. The old days when Canada just absorbed the hit and said, sorry, or fading. This is a country that's finally doing the math on what it's actually holding. So the next time you hear somebody say, America takes care of Canada, or that Canada wouldn't make it without the States, just remember what actually crosses that border every single day. The water, the oil, the gas, the power, the metals, the Arctic doorway to the future. America can print all the money it wants and build all the aircraft carriers it likes, but it can't drink a dollar bill. It can't run a factory on a speech. It can't heat a home with a threat. And it can't grow the food to feed itself without fertilizer that comes out of Saskatchewan. Geography handed Canada a stronger hand than almost anyone realizes, including a whole lot of Canadians. The only real question left is whether Canada finally decides to play it. Because up here, the quiet country most people love to overlook has been holding the whole deck all along.